So here's an interesting surprise, right? You're not always the guide. Sometimes it's actually damaging if your business positions itself as the guide because it's an inappropriate positioning for your audience and the service that you're currently providing your audience. Okay, so what we're going to be discussing in depth is the StoryBrand framework. In a sense, it's going to be kind of like a pros and cons thing. Like, I love it. I absolutely love it. However, I feel like it doesn't tell a complete story. It gives you an absolutely fantastic framework, but it falls short. And where it actually falls short is in its sort of like whitewashing the sort of positioning framework. It gives you just a very sort of like non-specific, well, it's a specific positioning framework, but in the sense of it is a non-specific framework for your current business. They just kind of created a single category, which is the guide, and they're like, everybody, you're the guide. All right, so we're going to be talking about why positioning yourself as the guide can actually be a bad decision, just a bad overall decision in positioning your company. So really, how you position yourself in the marketplace and how you talk to your customers, like how you're presenting your brand, should be based off of how your company is engaging with your customers, right? It should all be based off of how your customers see you, right? Like thinking about the journey that they're on, like, and as they're going about this journey, how are you helping them? How are you coming alongside them and supporting them as they're going through and going about their journey to achieve their specific goal? So the beauty of the StoryBrand framework, and I talk about SB7 all the time. I went to the workshop. It seriously changed my life. And I absolutely love StoryBrand. I think the entire their offering and what they're giving and their entire focus, their entire original focus was amazing until they switched, and now all they talk to are just coaches, right? That was, sometimes I don't understand. They know better than I do, right? So whatever. But the original, like the SB7 framework, it's a brilliant framework, and it's brilliant because it's really helpful in the sense that it introduces a lot of people who weren't in the know into story structure. It helps you understand that there's actually mechanics, a structure, a system, and a design to messages and to stories. And if you learn that design, and if you learn that underlying architecture, then you can systematize your storytelling, and you can also apply that structure to your entire organization's identity, because when you start understanding that stories are the crux and the foundation of our identities, right? We have personal narratives. You're just applying that to a business context, and then you're going forward and utilizing that to help you think through your brand positioning, think through your brand messaging strategy and your brand story. And then it's giving you this very specific framework of then presenting yourself to the audience. What I really love about it is that it is a tool for empathy. It helps to condition you to understand that when you and your customer are in the same room, you're not the most important person in the room. And also thinking about it from the perspective of when you're in the same room with your employees, you're not the most important person in the room. The most important person in the room is the person that you are serving. By being in the business world or by being in the nonprofit space, we have now accepted the responsibility of serving another person. It's personally why I love business. Business should be a daily humility practice of us taking the knee and being at service to the people that we are showing up for day in and day out to help. We are basically saying that you are our people, you're the people that we're going to be helping. How may we help you, right? That's what business is. And the beauty of the SB7 is it starts to condition your mind to sort of like upend this sort of like pride, this perspective of thinking that your company is the most important person in the room, right? That they should be lucky to buy from you, right? And that it's helping you frame your organization and begin to help you frame your organization from a perspective of the outside in. It's like what always happens when you're in an organization is you develop what I like to call the disease. And the disease essentially is the inability for you to see your organization from the outside in. It's the inability for you to see your organization from your customer's point of view. And what happens is you become insulated, and you're only ever seeing your organization from the inside looking out, right? I believe it was David C. Baker or Blair Enns on their podcast, The Two Bobs, where they're talking about that you get this warped perspective. It's kind of like trying to see the pickle jar from inside of the jar, right? It becomes impossible over time, especially if you're not regularly being mindful that that is happening to you, right? And so internally, organizations will develop their own jargon. You know, they develop their own culture because it's an organization, right? But you start to lose touch with how to appropriately see yourself, because you're constantly working from within the business, and you're rarely ever seeing yourself from outside the business, right? Like it's rare for, once you're working at a company, to start Googling that company, right? Or if you start your own company, to Google your own company, to like challenge yourself to see your business from a different perspective. StoryBrand framework is great because it teaches you, oh, what is that? Oh, I was getting some weird feedback. All right. The StoryBrand framework is great because it is a framework that teaches you how to see your company from your customer's perspective. It helps you start thinking about, you're not the hero of your story. Your customer is the hero of your story. And now let's start to question, what is that story that they're experiencing? What is the story they're going on? And if you're familiar with the SB7, right, you have a hero, which is your customer, and they have and they want something, right? They're trying to get to this ultimate end state, but as they're going across their journey to get what they want, they encounter a problem. That problem affects them on 3 different levels. There's the situational level, the emotional level, and the philosophical level, right? And then along comes a guide, right, who gives them a plan and calls them to action. And then in implementing that plan, it's either going to result in success or failure, and then inevitably result in that character's ultimate transformation. And so it challenges you. You now have to think about, okay, what does my customer want? And then it gives you this framework of really diving in to the full depth of the customer's problem, not just thinking about it as it's just a simple, like, oh, they need a camera. Well, we sell a camera, right? You start seeing that this camera actually reflects upon their identity, how they see themselves, that this camera is almost like in of itself a badge that says, I'm a filmmaker. And you start like reverse engineering. You realize that their dream and why they started into videography in the first place was because they wanted to be Steven Spielberg, right? Like, it's understanding that everyone is on this journey. They're living within a story, and you are playing a secondary role in that story. You're not the hero, they're the hero. And that is awesome. The fact that it's giving you a framework to challenge yourself to think about your customers from that perspective is great. It's not unique, right? None of this is none of what they're doing is unique, okay? Because the framework of itself is basically, it's a copywriting framework, right? It's the problem, agitation, solution framework, but you're kind of like fitting the the monomyth, right? Like Joseph Campbell's 12-step monomyth, and you're taking the problem, agitation, solution, copywriting framework, the 3-step framework and the 12-step monomyth, you're kind of like averaging both those structures together, getting the SB7, right? And when you thinking of your customer story, that's also not a unique, it's also not a unique thing, like when you think about like UX and lean design, they often speak in terms of your customer story and understanding your customer story and your customer journey. And it's thinking through what is the pathway that our customers are on and how are they interacting with our organization as they're going about through that path. It puts places, from that perspective, you're placing it more in a practical context. Like you're thinking about if you were to set up like a hospital clinic or something, you're thinking about like legit, like what is the situation that our patient is in, and how are they interacting with our clinic as they're going about their patient journey towards health, right? Now, it's awesome, okay? And so it's awesome because you're taking yourself off of that tier of importance and you're putting yourself down into a secondary role, and you're starting to see your customer as the hero. So we hope, right? But that's not actually what is happening. And so here's when we're actually going to start to unpack into the dangers of the StoryBrand framework. Now, the first danger is that it's a framework designed to help us keep our pride in check. Now, I'm not certain if they ever directly address the fact that we are prideful beings and prideful creatures, that it is our drive to be important. Like that's kind of like, if you even think about your story, like your driving desire, your story goal is to get you from this level to another level. It's to move you into a dream state. That's basically saying that you're trying to raise up yourself in importance. You're trying to carve out a more important existence for yourself. Like if we go to Star Wars, right? The reason why Luke Skywalker is looking into the sunset of Tatooine, he's not dreaming about moving from being a janitor to being a grave digger, right? Like it's not his hope. That's not his where he's going to find fulfillment. Okay. He's dreaming about getting off planet, right? So you're moving up into the stars, right? And he's dreaming about becoming like a star fighter, like some sort of space pilot, right? Like that's what he's dreaming about. That is an up level from his current situation. Even in tragedies, the hero is not starting off the tragedy thinking about, how do I mess up my life, right? So you're always thinking in terms of, let me think about how do I gain importance here? How do I gain, Seth Godin has a really great perspective where he believes a lot of our decision-making is guided by status. And so as we're deciding things, it's like, will this get me status? Like, how do I buy into a different social tier and a different social status? Because just for an example, it's like, I bought this microphone. This is not a camera. That's a camera. Ooh. I bought this microphone because it looks cool, right? But like, what does the phrase "look cool" mean, right? Like, cool is a status. It's like, this thing's cooler than the things I was using, which means there's a tier. There's a different tier of it there, and that's why I bought that tier. Okay, so we're prideful creatures. That's like my meandering. We're very pride driven. We're prideful creatures. I'm not saying you specifically, right? So don't get offended, right? But if we just like look at humanity and when you start to be honest with yourself, right? Like we're prideful creatures, okay? So it's great in the fact that it is trying to train you to put your customer up in that pride sense, but I'm not sure if they're actually directly addressing that, because if you actually start to directly address that, then you realize it's like, oh yeah, I am pretty like self-absorbed and prideful, and wow, a lot of my decisions are based on like raising up my level, or it is my driving desire to reach this sort of like plane of importance or whatever. But because I feel like they don't quite nail that on the nose, what happens is we start thinking about, oh, now I understand. I'm the guide. I'm the guide. This person needs me because they're going on their transformational journey. I'm not King Arthur. I'm not this wobbly little squire journeying his way to become this great king. I'm Merlin. I'm the wise wizard, and he can't become that king until he interacts with me. You understand? That's what happens within that framework. All we've done is we've just transitioned our pride from being the main character of the story into now seeing this main character as this lowly, weak person who needs our help. And we're not on a transformational journey because the guide doesn't change, right? And so since the guide doesn't change, you're going to see yourself as having all the knowledge base that is required to help this person of lack, this person in this state of lack, which is the customer, right? Give them what they need. Okay, so do you understand the sort of like circular logic we've now created based on the goal we're actually trying to achieve? We're actually trying to achieve empathy, understanding, and seeing your customer is more important than you. And what we just did is we now see them as probably lower than we saw them before, really needing us, right? And we're now even more special. So that's the danger, right? You just transitioned your pride from being the main character to now being the like know-it-all wise wizard who they desperately need our insight. Okay, so that's the biggest risk of all of it, is then you can make the mistake of start presenting yourself as that. The other downside here is that not every business should be positioning themselves as a guide. So if we just like, let's take one step past, like, okay, now you're assuming that you're a guide, right? Like your positioning, the part that you play in your customer's story depends on their story and how important your service is to their story. Does that make sense? Right? Like, not everyone can be the guide. When we start using language like you're a guide, there's a difference between being their guide, being their mentor, and helping to guide their decision about a specific thing. Okay? Huge difference. Both are presenting themselves in a consultative way, right? Both are positioning themselves in a consultative position, right? Like we are here to guide you. We are here to serve you. But one person is making a claim that they're going to get you everything that you want. And so what you're kind of communicating is like, I'm going to guide your business, right? And the other one is like, I'm going to guide this decision within this specific area. Okay? Big difference. And so that's the danger of telling everyone that you're the guide. You're not. Sometimes you're not, right? It depends on what type of business that you have and the amount of value that you're actually going to bring to the person that you're guiding, right? Like a counselor, right? Like a therapist, a life coach, those are guides, right? You're looking at a person's entire like psychological life, or you're coaching them through basically their life. That's a guide. That's someone that like I'm forming a relationship with them because I literally want life counsel about the trajectory of my life. Okay. Someone changing my oil in my car, not a guide. Okay. Like not a guide. That is not someone that I'm just like, oh man, like I am such this lowly hero with this car, right? Like, oh, I'm in desperate need of your oil because your oil will help me achieve my life goals. No, it won't. Like, no, it won't. However, and I'm not saying this to demean people in the automotive industry, right? That's not the point, not what I mean. What I'm trying to help you understand is that there is a very, very important distinction between someone who literally is a guide character along a customer's story and someone who understands how to more appropriately position themselves within their customer's story and can guide their specific decision and help their specific problem directly related to that subset, right? There's a hierarchy of need. There's a hierarchy of importance. And just blanket statement saying that everybody is the guide is basically saying that everybody is dealing at the top hierarchy, right? Like if you think about the guide character, the guide archetype, you're talking about Gandalf. You're talking about Dumbledore. You're talking about Morpheus. Those guys are mentors. They are guides. They show up with empathy and understanding who the character is. They give them a magical trinket, and then they also give them a teaching, a philosophy. They impart to them. They place a mantle of importance onto that character, and they help that character transition from their lowly state into a superhero, basically. That's what a guide does. Not everybody. It's very, very select few industries that can actually add that much value and cause that much transformation on a person. So if let's go back to the changing oil thing. Again, I'm not insulting people working in the auto industry. This is just for a hierarchy of needs and desires here. If you're changing someone's oil, you're not their guide because you can't possibly cause me to reach that level of greatness. And so you can't even, or you shouldn't even attempt to make such a statement or to position yourself in such a way that you are now a guide. Because if you do position yourself as that, you're inevitably going to be talking down to me, and you're basically going to be overinflating the importance of your product, and now it's insulting, right? Because now you've created an overinflated view of what you do and the service you provide and what I need. And so that level of positioning and that level of messaging and speech can be extremely offensive and can damage your entire business. It's now a risk and it's a threat. It threatens your entire company because you've now improperly positioned yourself and you're speaking to your audience in the improper way, right? Okay. And so that's my qualm with StoryBrand, is that they've given you a great foundation and it's a good start, but it doesn't tell the full story. And so it's like, okay, well then what do you need to do? Well, what you need to do is go even deeper into your customer's story and your customer's journey and start looking realistically about what is it that they're actually facing. So the problem that they're actually facing, what is that? How does that problem relate to their overall journey, and what story are they actually within? And within that story, what role do they see themselves playing? And what role do they see our company playing? Or what role do they see me playing within that story, right? And so this is when you start thinking about story archetypes. So this is why I love Booker's 7 basic plots. So the great thing about StoryBrand is it shows you that there is a framework to storytelling, and that it is a consistent framework of storytelling. And now you start understanding that there is something called story structure, that there's a mechanics to storytelling. There's a reason why stories work and stories don't work, that stories require certain factors, there's certain conditions that are required to tell a great story, and when those are not met, it's a bad story, okay? But then when you even start diving even deeper, you start understanding, especially if you look at Booker's 7 basic plots, is that there's what he believes that there's actually 7, he actually mentions 9, but there's 7 core archetypes, story plot archetypes that we tell over and over and over again. Even Kurt Vonnegut has this really slightly humorous, I believe he was trying to make it a dissertation, but people sort of mocked him for it. So he turned it into a bit of like a stand-up routine. But he was drawing story shapes, and he ends up drawing, I think, like about 6 different story shapes. And there was actually a study that was done that measured the sort of emotive quality of words within several novels, and they mapped out the emotional. I can't think of the word that I'm trying to say, but it's like the how positive or how negative each of the words were. And they mapped those out, and they were actually able to essentially map out the story arcs across multiple different novels, and they then kind of confirmed Vonnegut's drawings, which in a sense also confirm Booker's findings. It's that you have these 7 stories, anywhere from about 6 to 9 stories that we continuously tell ourselves over and over and over again. Think about these as different flavors of the hero's journey, right? Like they're all very similar to the hero's journey, but they're coming up in different expressions. What I've found very helpful is identifying the meta-narrative, right? Like that marketplace story, identifying the marketplace story and figuring out what archetype is my customer inside of. When you understand what archetype that they're living within, right? Like, what do I mean by an archetype? Is this an overcoming the monster story, or is this a voyage and return story, right? Like, is this a rags to riches, or is this a rebirth? Okay. When you start thinking in terms of that helps you get a little more specificity about what your customer is actually going through, right? Like, do they see themselves as really, really struggling for an example off the top of my head? Like, do they see themselves as Cinderella, right? Like, do they feel like they're in a situation where they're not getting the respect that they need? They're working a job that they don't quite enjoy, and they're waiting for like a fairy godmother to come along and impart some like magical wisdom and knowledge on them to get them to the ball, right? Like, is that how they see themselves, Or do they see themselves as simply like, I'm James Bond, right? And I just need someone to give me some really cool tools and show me how to use them so I can go continue to kick some butt, okay? Like, how do they actually see themselves within this story, and how are we showing up within the story, right? Like, what is the archetype that they're existing within? And then inside of that archetype, what's their role that they're playing? And then you're thinking about what archetype are they? Their brand persona, like their persona, what archetype is that? And when you've seen the role that they're playing, like what story are they inside of? What role are they playing and then inside of that story? Then it's a lot easier to understand, how do they see us inside of that story? Like, who are we in there? Like even if we think about like let's just say that they're on a James Bond storyline. Like they're overcoming the monster in their storyline, and that's who they are. Are we showing up as Q? Are we showing up as M? Are we Moneypenny in their story? Like, what is our role? What is our character in that story? What is the significance of our product and service to them along their journey? And then how do we need to now show up so that way we're speaking to them appropriately, because we're now mirroring that story back at them. And it's not from this inflated egoic space. It's from like really discerning, like, oh, they need me to be Moneypenny, right? Like, so I'm not supposed to be super loud in their life. Maybe I'm supposed to be just a little quiet or whatever. You know, like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, not everyone can be the guide, because not everyone has the character archetype of the mentor, right? Your character archetype might be the everyman. Your character archetype might be the healer, right? The caretaker, okay? Like, so start studying that. Like use StoryBrand. StoryBrand's a great start, but just be mindful that it can bite you if you position yourself as the guide, if you're not actually providing that significant transformational value to your customer. The value you're always providing causes a transformation, causes a character transformation, because as a business, you're taking someone from point A to point B, right? But you don't want to overinflate the importance of the product or service you're providing for your customer, right? And you definitely don't want to, you have to be mindful of fighting your own pride and fighting your own arrogance, and not showing up as this end-all, be-all solution, because from their perspective, they might not rate you like that. And so if you're showing up in a different position, you're now operating outside of your lane, and that could now hurt their own sense of self, right? And so that's the thing that we want to be actually like protecting, you know, is how our customer feels and the experience that they're having. All right. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, as always, you can find me on Instagram at McNabb_storytelling. Also, we just started Twitter, so you can tweet us. Is that how this works? We're still figuring it out, at Storytelligent. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.